This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
UN warns of unfolding humanitarian emergency situation in South Sudan. President Keita of Mali visits soldiers wounded in militant attack. And we look at how South Africa is preserving indigenous languages through children's books. Hello and welcome. You're watching Africa Live. We're coming to you live from Nairobi. I'm Hannah Viviers, and with the latest in your business news is Penny Karube.
Thank you, Hannah. Coming up on Africa Live Business, the International Monetary Fund says global debt has hit alarming levels. And Nigeria Customs cuts off supply to fuel stations within 20 kilometers of the country's borders. I'll be back with details of those stories and plenty more in just a bit. For now, it's back to you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Panina. We'll see you in just a bit. Well, let's begin the hour in South Sudan, where the UN is now warning of a looming humanitarian crisis caused by floods that hit that region. So far, more than 400,000 people have been displaced. Many of the victims did not salvage their belongings and are now dependent on humanitarian aid. The UN has released $10 million for intervention. The states of Boma and Jonglei have been the worst affected. Meanwhile, the International Organization for Migration has also scaled up humanitarian intervention in the country. Well, staying in South Sudan, President Salva Kiir says he accepts the delay of another 100 days in forming a unity government in order to avoid a return to war. The unity government was supposed to have been formed by November the 12th, but differences between President Kiir and opposition leader Riek Machar leading to a postponement. Well, we head to Burkina Faso, where at least 38 people were killed and dozens still remain unaccounted for following an ambush on an armed convoy transporting staff from a Canadian-owned gold mine. Burkina Faso is among the countries currently battling an Islamist insurgency, but the affiliation of the assailants involved in Wednesday's attack remains unknown. CGTN's Daniela Pearson has more.
12 of the injured have already been airlifted to a hospital in the capital, Ouagadougou. They are the victims of a deadly attack in Burkina Faso by gunmen who targeted a convoy of buses transporting the staff of Semafo, a Canadian-based mining firm. Sources say that about 250 workers travel under armed military escort each week to its Bungu mine located in the eastern part of the country.
We know for now there are 38 dead and 63 wounded, some lightly, others seriously. Those are the figures we have for the moment. Our troops are on the ground because some people are missing. Some of them are miners. In any case, we are still searching for mine workers.
Public officials say that the government has opened an investigation into the attack.
We have come here, first of all, in the name of His Excellency, the President of Burkina Faso, to see the site alongside the authorities and pass on our encouragement, and also take stock of what happened and pass our solidarity on to the wounded here.
Operations at the mine have been suspended since the incident, which occurred on a public road between the market town of Fada and the Bungu mine. But many families are still waiting for news. It's not clear exactly how many were in the convoy, what their nationalities were, or how many are still missing. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
The United Nations says about 1.2 million people are trapped without access to humanitarian assistance in northeast Nigeria. This, it says, is a result of activities of terrorist group Boko Haram in the region. Here's CGTN's Philly Haza with more from Abuja.
According to United Nations Humanitarian Coordinator in Nigeria, Edwin Kalon, terrorist group Boko Haram now largely controls 2 local government areas in northeast Nigeria. Mr. Kalon, who was speaking at the Security Summit on Friday in Maiduguri, Borno State, said this has posed a major challenge in providing humanitarian assistance to vulnerable people who live in the affected areas. The UN chief in Nigeria raised concerns that humanitarian workers have become major targets of the insurgents, particularly in the last 18 months, which has claimed the lives of at least 10 aid workers. 6 others are still missing. According to the global body, over 35,000 people, including soldiers, have been killed in the conflict against Boko Haram over the last decade. Nigeria's government is yet to respond to these claims. President Muhammadu Buhari continues to maintain that the insurgents have been technically defeated. Security experts say Nigeria must change its strategy in order to win the asymmetric war against the militant group. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
We go to Ethiopia now, where the United Nations is warning that unless more efforts are put into stopping the current locust infestation ravaging Ethiopia, the entire East and Horn of Africa regions could be affected. Swarms of locusts have invaded the country's 9 states. Farmers in northern Amhara say they have lost nearly 100% of their crops. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, insecurity in some parts of the country have hampered intervention efforts. The Ethiopian government has called for immediate action in combating the situation. Well, it's not the first time that Africa has suffered a locust infestation, and the warning issued by the Food and Agriculture Organization now raises fears of looming food shortages.
Locust infestations are not new in Africa. Locusts' existence and their devastating effects on crops in the continent is cemented by the oral narratives tied to famines as a result of these invasions. However, the 2004 locust invasion that hit North Africa is considered as the worst in recent history, and it is linked to effects of climate change. In the said year, the region had experienced an unusual wet winter and spring, which was followed by a very dry season. The locust eggs that had been buried in the desert sands hatched in numbers, leading to millions of insects which descended on crops in the North and West African regions. The swarms of locusts would later spread into Libya and Algeria. However, Mauritania was the worst affected. In the Eastern and Horn of Africa regions, the warning is not a surprise at all. The ongoing heavy rains, which are also being tied to changing weather patterns, are creating a perfect environment for a locust infestation situation. The Horn of Africa is largely dry, and the eggs that have been buried in the sands have just got into contact with moisture from the rains, which will initiate hatching. And the lush green vegetation that is now flourishing as a result of the downpour could provide the first food for the locusts, leading to a regional threat. Previous data from the Food and Agriculture Organization indicate that northern Eritrea is the main breeding point for locusts in the region. The most affected nations could be Somalia, Ethiopia, Djibouti and parts of northern Kenya, and parts of South Sudan that border with Ethiopia and Kenya. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
We go to Mali now, where President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta visited soldiers wounded in a militant attack earlier this month. 53 soldiers and 1 civilian were killed in Indilemane, Menaka region on November the 1st. The hit was seen as one of the deadliest strikes against Mali's military. CGTN's Muhammad Abubakar has that report.
The Islamic State claimed responsibility for the attack via its Amaq news agency. Security sources said that the hit involved at least 3 suicide bombers who detonated explosives inside the military camp in Indilemane.
It was a miracle because he was hit by a shell that did not explode, so it caused a big hole. Thankfully, there was no fracture.
Officials later reported that soldiers had left the outpost of Andahabukane, 85 kilometers from Menaka, fearing a similar attack, with most soldiers revealing that they are not well equipped to overcome these types of attacks.
We want the authorities to give us more equipment to fight the enemy.
Speaking to the surviving soldiers, President Keïta reiterated that the country is at war against jihadists.
Today we are attacked daily. We saw this yesterday in Burkina. We are now dealing with people who have neither faith nor laws, who have nothing to do with our religion, Islam, who have been on this soil for a long time.
I'm very pleased to meet with the President, and will call on the military hierarchy to change its fighting strategy.
Northern Mali came under the control of Al-Qaeda-linked fighters after Mali's army failed to quash a rebellion there in 2012. The attack on Indelimane follows jihadist raids in late September that underscored the increasing reach and sophistication of armed groups in the region.
So be constantly awake. When I go and pray, I put my weapon over there against the wall, or I go to the bathroom and I put my weapon against the wall. That is death, because you're dealing with people who are watching you. We don't see them, but they see us. They prey on us, the least weakness, and they exploit it against us. We don't have that right anymore.
From Mali, the violence has also spilled over to Burkina Faso and Niger, where fighters have exploited existing intercommunal strife, leaving hundreds dead. Mohamed Abubakar, CGTN.
In Beijing, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang has met with Jamaican Prime Minister Andrew Holness. Li Keqiang welcomed Holness outside the Great Hall of the People. He said the two countries have respected and treated each other equally since they established diplomatic ties nearly 50 years ago. Holness said Jamaica is ready to actively engage in the Belt and Road Initiative, as well as strengthen cooperation with China on trade, infrastructure and climate change. After the meeting, the two leaders witnessed the signing of several agreements. Well, the Hong Kong Hospital Authority has confirmed that a man has died of injuries after falling from a parking garage during last weekend's protest. 22-year-old Chow Tse-lok was a student at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Police have been looking for any footage captured by cameras at the scene. Chow fell into a coma after being sent to the hospital. The tragedy over the second-year computer science undergraduate has sparked student protests on campus. The graduation commencement was disrupted by masked students on Thursday. The ceremony was cut short given the circumstances. Hong Kong police have refuted allegations that they caused the death of a student protester in a car parking lot. During a press conference, they also expressed their grief over the death.
According to investigations, police entered the parking lot twice. The first patrol took place from 6 minutes past 11 to around 20 past 11 on Sunday night. The deceased was not inside the parking lot then. The second time was from 4 minutes past 1 on Monday morning when police were dispersing a crowd. Firefighters were carrying out emergency treatment when policemen entered the parking lot around that time. Some people allege that the police chased after the deceased, even pushed the deceased, which led to his falling. Police once again solemnly declare that no such thing happened.
Well, it's time now for us to take a short break. When we return, we have more news for you, including hacking and social media posing danger to Ethiopia's security. And Botswana's diamond company establishes footprint in education sector.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Well, the army in the Democratic Republic of Congo says it has killed 25 rebels in the eastern part of the country since it launched a military operation last month. The announcement comes 2 days after 10 civilians were killed in an attack in the eastern town of Beni. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has more.
The Congolese army says the rebels were killed in a battle in the eastern town of Beni. The army launched the military offensive last month under the orders of President Tshisekedi. The offensive targets all armed groups in the east that have been killing civilians and attacking healthcare workers trying to contain the Ebola outbreak. 7 government soldiers are reported to have been killed in the operation. The eastern part of the DRC has been racked by conflict for decades. The Beni region, which borders Rwanda and Uganda, has suffered several recent attacks. Many of them have been blamed on a Ugandan Islamist militia called the Allied Democratic Forces. The DRC initially called upon 5 neighboring countries to help the Congolese army fight against the rebels, but the country later decided it would launch the offensive without any foreign assistance. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
This week, Ethiopia is marking Cybersecurity Week. There are reports that the country is experiencing an increase in cyber attacks. According to the government, most of the attacks include system hacking. CGTN's Koleta Wanjohi took an in-depth look at the situation and at the dangers posed by social media.
Journalist Elias Meseret is a social media fact-checker. He has been doing this for 2 years now, after some initial training.
What I'm trying to do is to check the authenticity or the truthfulness of these contents and then to present it to the public, because in recent months we all are witnessing a large number of fake news items in terms of it could be images, videos, and also photoshopped items are appearing, and many people are using it to gain some political gains.
Since 2015, platforms like Facebook have been blamed by the government for being a conduit of propaganda and ethnic incitement. In October, a post by a political activist led to ethnic clashes in several parts of the country. Elias says there is too much for him to do alone.
Since I started the initiative, some days I get up to 200 requests to fact check some items. So literally I'm not able to do that independently. The first one is the challenge is getting all these requests and trying to check all of them, which I can't. And the second one is when I fact check on some of the items, I got some negative reaction from those people who are posting those items, and I even got some threats. Some of them were a very serious one. And the third challenge is getting access to information even from government bodies.
Human rights activist Abel Wabela has joined in the effort. He has started an initiative called Addis Zaibe. Beyond fact-checking, his team uploads videos to train citizens to verify online content.
We have to focus on increasing the awareness of the public how to use the social media. So we have a very high illiteracy rate, and also in the case of the media literacy, we are not doing good. So especially the adults didn't understand how they use social media, and they took everything they got on social media as a fact.
His team says it will take time to make people understand it is not always safe online.
By informing the public through our website, Twitter, Facebook, all our social medias, not just that the fake images were used, but how they were used, why were they used, and how did they manipulate our minds, and why is it very easy to believe fake images as opposed to just, whatever somebody says.
In the past, government has fought polarized social media content by shutting down the internet. Cyber experts say shutting down the internet is not just a temporary solution, but also very costly to the economy. They are advising the government to set up legal frameworks to tackle cyber insecurity. The Ethiopian National Security Agency says overall cyber attacks have increased from 576 in 2018 to 791 this year. The attacks mainly include hacking into websites and government systems, blocking monetary services, and cyber terrorism. And as it seeks a lasting solution, citizens like Meseret are looking for funding to increase their capacity and help make the Ethiopia cyberspace safe. Koleta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
In Botswana, education is seen as a critical component in the country's development. One company, Botswana, key player in the diamond sector, has gotten involved in the education sector. Let's take a look.
Orapa, Letlakane and Damsha mines operate 4 co-educational schools near the Orapa mine, run by Botswana for its employees.
So education is how we empower the younger generations so that tomorrow they can have the skills necessary for them to take part actively in the economy, but also for them to also earn a living.
While Tawana is a private school, it works within government educational parameters.
The government has introduced the early childhood program in the government schools. It's very important at this age for the kids to start their education, their formal education, because that's where they grasp concepts easily. And it also helps them in their primary education. Once they get their issues of literacy, issues of numeracy, they really become very easy for the kids.
The school leadership has a simple test to see if they have achieved their objectives.
Our kids learn how to read at the age of about 5. When they leave Tawana preschool, most of them are able to read, a book, not a novel, but just a small book, storybook for kids.
We believe that education is one of the ways to empower younger generations and the community, and so we put priority to education.
Early stage learning is essential to set the basis to build that groundwork and that foundation for later education and tertiary education as well. And they seem to be getting it right here in Botswana. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN near the Orapa mine.
As the world marked the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists, Ugandan journalists took to the streets in protest against police brutality. The journalists marched to Uganda's police headquarters with a petition demanding press freedom, claiming the country's law enforcement agency is increasingly violating their rights during work. The focus of this year's event was on local reporters. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga reports.
A push for freedom of expression. Ugandan journalists are demanding equity from law enforcement agencies.
We were sprayed with tear gas. Then one of the police officers came with a gun and he injured me.
Police moved in to quell the protest, saying it was an illegal assembly. But many demonstrators remained as they seek answers from the police authorities. The protest was triggered by the arrest and beating of journalists by police while covering a strike at Makerere University. Journalists here are moving to petition police about the brutality from its officers, but they have been blocked. And as they push harder to make their voices heard, more journalists are falling victim to the rising tension between the media and law enforcement agencies. In just 1 week, 15 journalists have been arrested and beaten by law enforcement agencies. Alex Esagala is recovering from injuries he sustained in the recent crackdown by law enforcement officers.
The good thing, I was putting on a bulletproof, so it fell down. Then it exploded under my legs. I got severe injuries, and then I was admitted at IHK, that is International Hospital, Kampala.
This comes after celebrating the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists, and that the focus is on local reporters. Human rights defenders say Uganda police needs to change their attitude towards journalists.
We are overwhelmed as lawyers for journalists. We are overwhelmed with the requests for rapid response. We are overwhelmed with the requests to unseal closed media houses. We are overwhelmed with requests to recover stolen and broken cameras and other media equipment. Our offices are overwhelmed. Something has to be done.
Police argue that journalists portray a bad image of police as they try to break up violent protests. And as both parties work towards harmonizing their work relations, media practitioners want law enforcement officers to know that journalism is not a crime. Hilary Ayesiga, CGTN, Kampala.
Well, one of the world's leading travel guide publishers, Lonely Planet, has featured Tunisia in the top 10 list of the best tourist destinations to visit in 2020. Tunisia has been ranked as the 7th best destination in the world to explore. CGTN's Adnan Shuashi reports on the picturesque nature that has earned Tunisia the accolade.
Lonely Planet has selected the top 10 countries, regions, towns and tourist destinations in the world to explore in 2020. The National Office of the Tunisian Tourism explains that Tunisia has been able to show its true potential as a distinguished tourist destination. The Tourism Ministry has recorded so far more than 25 million overnight stays nationwide.
This ranking is the result of several reforms which kicked off in 2015. The promotion and marketing of Tunisia as an exceptional tourist destination was made gradually. Tunisia has restored the confidence of tour operators, airlines and tourists in our market.
The Ministry of Tourism and private sector professionals have highlighted the country's rich nature, culture, history and ancient monuments. Tunisia has attracted millions of tourists who are looking for a unique North African and Mediterranean experience.
Tunisia looks small, but in reality, the tourism package is very diversified. Tunisia is rich in natural beauty, beaches, forests and mountains in the north to the desert in the south. Tunisia can welcome tourists at any period of the year for cultural tourism and other activities.
As part of security tightening efforts, the Ministries of the Interior and Tourism implemented a protocol requiring hotels to comply with international safety standards. Travel To Do is one of the leading online travel agencies in the region. Its CEO says security in Tunisia is an important argument.
A few years ago, the country was deserted by tourists. Now ranking 7th is an extraordinary boost to the sector. The authorities have implemented extra security measures to guarantee the safety and well-being of tourists.
According to the Regional Tourism Office, hotel units in Tozeur Governorate south of the country recorded an occupancy rate of 90% this week. As the city hosted several cultural events, the number of tourists has increased by 35% from the beginning of the year until October compared to the same period of 2018.
Tunisia has welcomed 7.5 million tourists since the beginning of the year, an increase of 14.8% compared to the same period last year. The tourism revenues jumped by over 41% to reach around $1.62 billion. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, I'll be standing by to bring you more news making headlines, including your sports news. But for now, let's take a look at what's happening in the world of business with Penina.
Thank you, Hannah. And coming up on Africa Live Business, the International Monetary Fund says global debt has hit alarming levels. And Nigeria Customs cuts off supply to fuel stations within 20 kilometers of the country's borders.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
According to the IMF, the global debt load has surged to a new all-time record equivalent of more than double the world's economic output. Global debt, with public and private, has reached an all-time high of $188 trillion. This amounts to about 230% of the world output. While private sector borrowing accounts for the vast majority of the total, the rise puts governments and individuals at risk if the economy slows.
Public debt in advanced economies is at levels not seen since the Second World War. Emerging markets public debt is at level not seen since the 1980s debt crisis. And low-income countries are witnessing sharp increases in their debt burdens over the last 5 years. First, we need to ensure that borrowing is more sustainable. This means proceeding carefully in making a judgment on taking new debt, focusing more on attracting equity-based investment, FDI, boosting tax revenues so we are on a sound basis when we borrow more, and stepping up the fight against red tape and corruption.
Let's shift focus now to the world's top 2 economies. China and the United States have agreed to roll back tariffs on each other's products. The move comes amid rising hopes that the 2 economies will sign a pact that declares an end to a trade fight that has disrupted the global economy. CGTN's James Spellman reports from Washington.
Trade negotiators appear to be making significant progress toward ending the China-U.S. trade war, agreeing to roll back tariffs.
In the past 2 weeks, the leaders of both sides have conducted serious and constructive discussions on properly addressing their core concerns and agreed to a phased cancellation of tariff increases depending on the progress of negotiations.
Last month, while meeting with Chinese Vice Premier Liu He, President Trump announced negotiators were close to an agreement on the first phase of a deal that would address intellectual property concerns and provide greater market access in China for U.S. financial services firms. Trump also said China would purchase more U.S. agricultural products. At the time, the U.S. only agreed to cancel a small scheduled tariff increase. There was no announcement about the massive tariffs the 2 countries began slapping on each other's products a year and a half ago. That appears to have changed.
The trade war was started with the increasing tariffs and should be terminated by the elimination of tariffs. If the 2 sides can reach a first phase agreement based on the deal, the already imposed tariffs should be cancelled proportionately. This is an important condition for reaching an agreement.
No details have been released about a timetable or which tariffs would be dropped. If an agreement is finalized, it would be good news for American farmers. Many of them rely on the Chinese market.
We've been disappointed that it has taken this long, but we're still hopeful that we're still going to get the best trade agreement possible.
Analysts say implementation of the first phase of a trade deal would have wide-ranging benefits.
Very important to have a first step which is substantial in terms of reduction of existing tariff. Then it's going to be a lot better for the 2 economies involved and more in general for the global economy.
President Trump had hoped to sign an agreement for the first phase of this trade deal with Chinese President Xi Jinping at the APEC leaders meeting in Chile next week. That event has since been canceled. The 2 countries are now trying to find an alternative time and place for the presidents to sign a deal if an agreement can be finalized. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
Elsewhere, at the opening of the 2nd China International Import Expo, President Xi Jinping reiterated China's commitment to being a source of global demand. Xi says China is ready to open its arms to countries to provide more growth and investment opportunities. Our reporter Uche Okoronko was there and brings you the following report.
In this one room, a spectacular presentation of the best the world has to offer. From the finest cigars and rum, the latest in cutting-edge technology, to uniquely choreographed dances. Each of the 61 nations present are here to pitch their cultural identity and economic wealth to China's vast market. There is a reason why this year's National Pavilion is especially crowded. Several of the initiatives that China promised would further open up its economy have by and large been put in place. Also, several new relationships have been established. For many of the nations who are here at this expo, this is a green channel or an easier route into China's massive consumer market. For the Dominican Republic, this is a first. The nation only just kicked off diplomatic relations with China in 2018. At the Expo, the Caribbean country is not just selling itself as a promising tourist destination, it is also an exporter of tobacco, pineapples, bananas, and cocoa.
Companies actually from both countries are doing business with rum,
We came with the cigars, also the cocoa beans and the coffee. And this year we wanted to actually try with new products. So for example, we brought Larimar, which is a special stone only in the Dominican Republic, and also minerals. So we're expecting actually to increase, and this year, for example, we have been increasing exports from the Dominican Republic to China, and China is being actually one of our main partners in business.
Nations like Russia are on the fast track to hitting $200 billion in trade turnover with China by 2024. They are here to nurture new growth points in their relationship with the country, and the focus has been on innovation, such as this Russian-made presidential state car designed and produced by engineering firm NAMI.
We worked a lot with the Chinese companies, so they support us with some of the parts, for example, or with creating some of the technological parts like multimedia or something like that. And now we're coming here to provide some support from our side, from engineering.
This year, just 8 African nations were at the National Pavilion, including South Africa and Tanzania. China is Africa's largest trading partner. African exports to the country rose to 15% by 2018, from just 3% in 2001. But they still remain low value-added commodity-based goods. Countries like Côte d'Ivoire are trying to change that, seeking a market in China for products such as textiles.
Our textiles are produced in Côte d'Ivoire. They are mostly handmade products which are weaved together using the local materials. Today, I've met with the local Chinese who want the Made in Africa product that is not only good quality, but it's celebrating the African culture and style.
The Expo has been touted as a new approach to global trade. It is the world's first national exhibition focusing on imports, symbolic of China's expanding trade liberalization agenda. Uche Okoronkwo, CGTN, Shanghai.
Katanga Mining, a big Congolese copper and cobalt producer, will raise around $5.8 billion through a rights issue as part of a debt-for-equity swap with parent Glencore. Katanga Mining will subsequently owe Glencore $1.5 billion, reducing its debt from $7.7 billion. That's after experiencing setbacks, including a fall in the price of cobalt from record levels of $95,000 per ton in 2018 to around $35,000 now. Glencore, which owns approximately 86.3% of Katanga, had agreed to swap $5.8 billion in debt for equity, which will raise its stake further in the firm. Remaining shareholders will also have the chance to take up the rights issue, but it is not yet clear whether they will. The residual debt of $1.5 billion will remain outstanding until 2023. Experts and policymakers from at least 14 Eastern African countries have attended the UN's Economic Commission for Africa annual meeting. The delegates discussed ways of creating a unified market, regional macroeconomics and social development. CGTN's Grim Chala was there.
In Eastern Africa, most local currencies remain moderate and inflation has stayed within range since 2018. However, global economic conditions continue posing constant challenge to the performance of the regional economies. The exchange rate fluctuation is one of the problems. On the other hand, observations at this annual meeting point to the fact that East Africa will continue growing by at least 6.4% this year alone. However, experts say this growth must spur investments that will create jobs in sectors like agriculture and infrastructure development. The resolution of political conflict between Ethiopia and Eritrea is hoped to also deliver a boost to growth in the Horn of Africa region. On the other hand, there are already intensified talks here on the rapid formation of a unified market. If and when implemented, this new bloc will help expedite the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area in East Africa. Grumjala CGTN, Asmara, Eritrea.
Nigeria's Customs Service has directed that petroleum products should not be supplied to fuel stations within 20 kilometers of the country's borders. It's part of an ongoing efforts by the Nigerian government to stop smuggling activities. Our correspondent Philly Haza has more from Abuja.
Controller General of Nigeria's Customs Service, Hamid Ali, says no petroleum product should be discharged in any filling station close to the country's borders, no matter the tank size. The directive is expected to take immediate effect, but customs officials haven't said how long it will be in place. The Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation raised concerns in July that up to 10 million liters of petrol are daily smuggled outside the country across land borders. There's a price disparity of petroleum products being sold in Nigeria when compared to other West African countries. For instance, while the pump price of petrol in Nigeria is around 40 cents per litre, it's sold in other neighboring countries for about $1 per litre. This latest development is likely to affect motorists who live within those border communities, as they'll have to drive longer distances to buy fuel. Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari closed the country's land borders in August to curb smuggling activities around the borders and says this will remain the case until next year. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Zambia is currently the second largest copper producer in Africa. In recent years, the Southern African nation has been trying to expand its exports beyond copper to diversify its economy. As CGTN's Farai Mokutuye now reports, it seems Zambia may have found just the right product to do that.
Tons of raw honey that would have ordinarily been sold cheap or used to brew village alcohol are now finding their way into warehouses like this, ready to be processed for export. Meet Pandolika got into what he calls a sticky but sweet business after realizing the opportunity to sell his country's unique product to the rest of the world.
Every hive has a different flavor. Every pound or kg of Zambian tree honey harvested tastes different, just depending on what the bees are eating in that forest area, what's around it, what flowers are grown, stuff like that. So it's very unique in a sense, you know what I'm saying? No honey around the world has that variation. Every packet, every pouch, every jar you see won't taste the same.
The first stage of processing sees this machine is squeeze the honey out of the comb. And so what you see here is literally off the tree branch, and it is pure, unadulterated sweetness, which is already trickling through the entire Zambian economy.
Honey production, currently sitting at 2,000 tons per annum, is set to grow to over 10,000 on the back of increased exports, whose value has already jumped from $1.6 million in 2015 to $3.1 million in 2018.
We have been known to be copper producers for centuries. Now we want to diversify and go into other industries. Honey exports can be a key component in the growth of the economy and fight against poverty in Zambia through job and wealth creation.
More than 30,000 rural beekeepers are expected to propel the industry, which has radically changed their way of life.
It can really help people out there where there's nothing. Like where we're getting this honey, there's literally nothing. It's just dense forest, couple of mud huts, this and that. So that way, it's really, we feel proud, in a sense.
As does the nation, that's abuzz with anticipation about the prospects for the future. Farai Mokutuye, CGTN, Lusaka, Zambia.
That's it for now on Africa Live Business. But later on Global Business, Nigerian-owned retail businesses remain shut in Ghana following an onslaught by Ghanaians seeking to protect their top. We'll have the details live from Accra at the top of the hour. I shall see you then. For now, it's back to you, Hannah.
Sounds very interesting, Kalina. We'll be looking forward to that. We'll see you in a bit. But for now, we're going to take you to a short break. When we return, more news, including we'll look at how South Africa is preserving indigenous languages through children's books. Welcome back. You're watching Africa Live. Well, books for children written in African languages are rare, especially in South Africa, where less than 20% of the population reads for leisure, making publishing a rather expensive exercise. But one young publisher is determined to change this and preserve South Africa's languages. CGTN Sumitra Naidu brings us that report.
Dimakhatso Mkhudi started Peo Literature with the aim of ensuring young children learn their family language. She publishes bright, colourful and glossy books for little children.
The level of literacy in the country right now, children in primary school, foundation phase, and I'm talking about like from 8-year-olds to 12, people who should be able to read at this point in time. 60% of those kids are not able to read. And if they can read, they are not reading with understanding, especially in our African languages, because there weren't too many books written in African languages, especially to read for leisure. Even now, you still find those kind of challenges because you have young people having kids. So for them, sitting and reading for their children, it's not a priority. The priority is for them to make sure that the child has eaten, the child goes to school, the teachers will teach them at school, and it's not enough.
Peo Literature publishes the books in 10 of South Africa's official languages, appealing to more of the population.
As a parent, we have a role to play to parent our kids. And if we want literate children, it is our responsibility to make sure that our children are literate and they can read. I really worry about the black child because when you get to a certain point in life, like varsity, the challenges that you face there, it's things that could have been prevented should things have been taken care of when you were younger. So if we don't build our children to be confident in when it comes to literature space, we are setting them up for failure in future. For me, language is who we are. If we take away the language, we have taken away like our core.
Mkhudi is determined though to get South Africans reading. She wants children to embrace their culture and develop a love for books, especially in their own language. Reading is an important step in early childhood development. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Uganda hopes to boost its tourism and wildlife conservation by relocating giraffes to an area of the country where they'd become extinct more than 20 years ago. 15 Rothschild giraffes have been moved to Pian-Upe Reserve in Karamoja region, where other species of wildlife roam the plains. Isabel Nakira reports.
Conservationists released 15 giraffes to the Pian-Upe Reserve in eastern Uganda. They were brought here from the Murchison National Park in the country's northwest.
With this move, we're helping to repopulate this protected area, which once held one of Uganda's largest populations of giraffe. With this conservation translocation, we're hoping to restore the ecological function that these large mega herbivores once provided to this system, and in doing so, we also hope to increase the tourism value here.
Giraffes were wiped out from Pian-Upe Reserve due to poaching. Tribal communities hunt them for their meat, hides and tails. It's hoped bringing them back could help boost tourism. Tourism is one of top leading revenue earners, bringing in about $1.4 billion.
It is a nice place to be, I'm sure, for tourists, and therefore it was important that we make sure that there is enough wildlife for tourists to come and see. But that aside also it enhances the conservation value of the protected area.
Uganda has around 1,700 giraffes, but the number could increase as a result of the translocation exercise. Giraffes are considered an endangered species, and that's why conservationists are trying to spread them out in all game reserves. Conservationists say it's easier to wipe out an entire population if they were concentrated in one location. The Uganda Wildlife Authority says it's sensitizing communities about the importance of conserving wildlife. Some animals like giraffes are also totems for some communities, and conservationists hope this time round the giraffes will be treated with dignity. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Well, it's time for a short break. Your sports news is coming up. Here's what you can expect. Zambia women frustrate Kenya to 2-2 draw in Tokyo 2020 Olympics first leg qualifier in Nairobi.